Week 6 of the local government citizens academy. Hard to believe that we are 3/4 of the way through already, and we still have a lot to learn. Tonight we have two subject areas. Our first one is development services, and the second hour will be on Missoula Redevelopment Agency. Now you've probably kind of been wondering, why do we keep moving from location to location? Anybody have any idea?
So get to see Missoula.
Get to see Missoula.
We don't burden any one group.
There you go. So it's in part because of how we have these various different taxing jurisdictions. Next week we're going to be at the county building. Our first week was at Hellgate High School, where we got to spend a lot of your tax dollars to help rebuild that school. We're here at First Interstate Bank because it's one building that receives some dollars from MRA, or Missoula Redevelopment Agency. Our first hour, though, on development services is going to be our director of development services, Mike Haynes, and Lavelle Means, who is our senior planner. Now, we have the fire department, we have the police department, super exciting. Tonight is going to be a bit more wonky, so make sure we have our thinking caps on. But this is exciting stuff to me because, well, you all got to hear me introduce Jeremy Keene last week. He was our new Director of Public Works. He also happens to be my husband. And years ago, I went to visit him at his office where he worked at WGM. And I was waiting for him to finish up a phone call, and I pulled a book off the shelf, and it's called A Pattern Language. It goes back to 1979, and I filled with lots of little graphics and pictures. And what spoke to me was how land use can be fingered together, both urban as well as the rural areas. And when it's done right, you always are in touch with both sides of you. And that has always stuck with me 15 years later. And so on city council, when I get to actually talk about land use planning, I get kind of excited about it. And that's why we're going to have Lavelle and Mike take it away from here. So, thank you. And welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone, for being here. I am Mike Haynes, the Development Services Director. The star of tonight's show, though, is Lavelle Means. I'm just going to introduce a couple of slides here to talk about our department and what we do. Lavelle's going to jump into talking about visioning, and I'll wrap up by talking about how to make that happen. So this is development services. We're comprised of 6 divisions. The first one of those divisions is long-range planning, and Lavelle is head of that group. And they're the folks that are really doing those longer-range planning projects. We're talking about things like, of course, the growth policy most importantly, but also all of the longer-term things that we do. Most recently, the design excellence work was done by Lavelle's group, and I'm sure she'll talk about many other things that that group is responsible for. We have a land use and permitting group, and I'm going to be talking a bit about land use as we move into the second half of this presentation, the making it happen part. And this is a group that goes before planning board and city council many times for things like rezonings and conditional use and those kind of things. This group also accepts plans submitted by the community for projects of various sizes. We do the plan review, we issue the permits, and that's primarily what that second group is doing. The building group is primarily comprised of building inspectors that are out inspecting everything from a small rewiring job in your home to the Stockman's Bank building or the new Rome student housing project, whatever it might be, from the largest to the smallest projects. We have a civil engineering group that is primarily responsible for both public and private projects around town, including roads and streets, including water and sewer projects. And they're the folks that review plans, accept plans, oversee the infrastructure being installed, and then accept plans ultimately on behalf of the city. Because ultimately, even if it's private development, the city is going to own that infrastructure system. We need to make sure that it's up to standards, and because we'll be responsible for that in the long term. Fifth, we have a transportation group. I'm sure you've heard of Missoula in Motion. We have a bike pedestrian program. But most of all, those folks do regional transportation planning. So they're planning not just for the city, but for the entire urban area, areas in the county that are within that metropolitan planning area, as we call it. And then finally, of course, we have, like we all do, we need some administrators to keep everything on track. And that is the sixth division that we have. So that's our group. There won't be any tests later. It's a lot of folks, but literally everything that you see around town, if there's dirt being moved, construction being done, anything of any scale at all, then this group has a hand in approving that and making sure that it's what we need, the standards that we need as a community. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Lavelle to talk about long-range planning. Visioning.
Yes. All right. Thank you, everybody. I'm Lavelle Means, and yes, I just want to say pattern language is a great template and kind of timeless way of thinking about planning, starting from a larger perspective and then bringing it all the way down to somebody's home. So it's a great way to put balance together and a way of thinking of how we interact in space in a way that is both thinking about our physical environment and our characteristics and qualities. And I think that's something we've been trying to do in our planning section and for the city for many, many years. So this is a great topic. It's about creating a vision and making it happen. We, in the planning section, work a lot on the front end of the vision and policy work, and then help with developing rules that have to do with making it happen. And then Mike was talking about other sections in our office that interact with people on a project-by-project basis as well. So what I was going to do tonight is talk about the vision and break it down a little bit, think about it in several key ways, and then go from there into talking about one of our sort of preeminent policy visioning document, which is the growth policy, we call it, and it's the Our Missoula document, and you all got little flyers about what briefly describes that here. And use an example while we talk about planning and what planning does. And then go a little further into other ways that we make it happen when Mike talks about rules, and then you'll be hearing about the many things that the MRA does with Ellen Buchanan at the helm. So that's a snapshot of what we want to cover tonight. First off, I just wanted to mention that a benefit about thinking about vision is that it really helps us to collect the concepts of city change in an aspiring, organized, collaborative, and comprehensive way. So vision when it comes to the city is a lot about how we capture in breadth a way to talk about our city as we aspire for it to be and the way that we see it now and how we see it in the future. It is essentially the first thing that you try to lay out when you're thinking about city goals and objectives and actions for the city. But it is really like a pathway that the goals and objectives start to help to nail down for us as we're developing policies. To do that, I think it's really important to think about what a city means to us and what a city does for us. So I've placed some statements here about what I think that means. I think that cities are growing, dynamic, and responsive, livable places. They change. They don't stay the same all the time. And they need to be responsive to us living in the place, and they need to be responsive to how our needs change, how technology changes, how the environment changes. So they need to do that in informed ways. So we want our city to be not reactive, but proactive, and know about the information in our community, the data, the trends, the things that are changing, and be ready for that. they should be read and understood. Cities, you should be able to understand what a city is directing you towards. And what I mean by that is, I think you can tell when you are in the core of a city. I think you can tell what is the downtown of Missoula. There's a different vibe about it. There's some identifiable pieces. There's maybe more history in those places. That becomes pretty common. But I think you can also tell when a city isn't working and when you can't find that core, that center, or that pinnacle, or that steeple. And so that's the way that you can read and understand and interact with the city. I've experienced that in a few places where I could just get lost because I'm relatively new to this place and I cannot tell where that downtown is. So you might know of some places like that too. And then I think cities should have a path or a direction they want ahead. And again, that is about charting our course, being ready for change, and being informed about that. So I was just going to pause right here and ask you if you think, am I covering it pretty well? Are there some other aspects of what a city does that you would like to add and share as well? Yeah.
I don't have that brochure you referred to.
Oh, okay. Coming your way. Over here with us? Yes.
I guess, like the city development as an advocate for its citizens and how you kind of take that into account when planning. Does that make sense?
Yeah. The character, it's fundamentally needs to be the voice for the people and taking that into consideration and being a balancing of that.
Topper?
I see up there aspiring, and I was wondering how you balance what can, maybe a realistic vision versus that aspirational vision.
It's a hard thing to do, and some of the future slides will show you that, we don't get a chance to just start over. We have this fabric that's here already. But aspiring can come from thinking about challenging ourselves, I guess, to think about where our youth are what they're going to think this place should look like and feel and interact and be here for many, many years from now. So putting ourselves in other people's positions is one way to be able to do that. Thinking about those other elements of people, I think, is a way to aspire. While we were working on our growth policy document, there are new components in there I don't think we've ever really touched on before, which is to say, this city has a voice of equality and diversity and recognition, and so we try to capture that in the policy and then see how that can affect and make its way through other aspects of how we live. I think about it when we think of health in our community and how that plays out with relationship to our physical setting too. So those are some of the ways I might be thinking of aspiring, and I think of aspiring as a way to sort of challenge us as we're thinking of our vision, of our statement. So just to be beyond the here and the now and what we're so comfortable with. Okay. I'm going to move on to just talk a little bit more about some of those key components of the vision. I highlighted a few ways in, I think, to talk about it. One is through the values of our place. The other is through how we change and how to think about change. And the other is to capture, as best you can, to interact and represent people in those policy documents. So through values, I think of where we are now and how to identify our characteristics, our place, our qualities. And then change, I think, again, goes back to being informed and thinking about a direction that we want to have that sort of organization and collaboration. And people, I think, is, again, talking about the the voice that we attempt to capture in the best way we possibly can. And sustaining here has to do with us being ready for a lot of things, being resilient and ready for change. So those are some of, I think, the key elements when we think about vision and how that all gets wrapped together in our starting point with our policy documents. We were just going to take a second here, a break now, and ask you to write down with a Post-it note, 2 Post-it notes actually, and Mike's going to pass that around. One word that could describe Missoula for you today, from your perspective, on the physical aspect of our community. Something, a word that you could use to talk about our aesthetic, our key features, maybe an iconic thing. And jot that down on a Post-it note. And then the second Post-it note is to ask you to write down 1 word that describes Missoula from your perspective on a more emotional, qualitative front.
So 1 physical, 1 emotional.
Yeah, about now. And we're going to collect all these and put them together in a word cloud so that we can share and see how much there is in common with those words. We hope to, anyway.
Wait, do we get 2 Post-it notes or 1?
Yeah, Mike, are you passing out 2 Post-its each?
1.
Well, they're doing, you can do it on the screen.
Okay.
You can do it on the screen. You can bring it in. So
Bringing it back, thanks, sir.
when we think about the values and the way that it relates to developing policy and vision for the community, it is a lot about our identity. You know, we need to know and talk about our place, our history, our culture. We also need to be informed about the demographics of our community, the community profile, and information that is about who we are here now. And then we also need to be thinking about what, this isn't a start over like I mentioned. It needs to be about a continuum, that we are a voice that is building off of who we are into, new policy and new direction. So we think about what we already know in terms of plans and current plans, and we gather all that together to help develop that vision statement. So it's more about our current and our past, and that's an important part about developing our vision and our policies. But it's also about knowing about where we want to be in 20 or even further out time frame. So now I want to stretch your thinking and ask you to think about that same thing, that 1 word that would describe Missoula from a physical perspective and another word that would describe it from an emotional for 20 years out from now. And go ahead with another Post-it note, write those words down. So 20 years into the future, a change. As I mentioned, I'm going to add these words onto some slides and create some word clouds to just show what we might see in common and have some observations about change too, what we see from 20 years out from now. Well, we look at that, again, that whole concept of change. Places do change. And for the growth policy, while we were talking about that, we were thinking about that path forward. There was a lot of interest in thinking about how to capture that path under the concept of focusing inward. So we looked at that path forward as a focused inward path because it was a good way to think about making good use of our infrastructure and our systems we currently have, and being able to balance places where development might happen along with places where it's important to protect the environment. And think in terms of where we develop and what the impacts might be and how you think about transportation related to planning and land use and health and etc. So it is a lot about balancing these many different features in our city and thinking about things in a comprehensive and collaborative way. So another aspect of change is the fact that, again, kind of going back to our data, is that we need to think about how we as a community changes and those trends. So some of those things you might have heard about, like we are an aging population. So what does that mean in terms of access to services, where housing is located, that it be close to things that people need to get to in an easier way where you might not be driving as much. How do you prepare for, an economy with an aging population? So there's a lot of things that relate to the kinds of demographics we look at and the trends that we think about and how that might play out in terms of the goals and objectives for the community and even some of the mapping of where guided locations of services might be. Yeah?
You have a perspective that enters mind. We're already an aging population. You just don't recognize the aged.
Well, yeah. I'm an aging, I hear you. I think what we, recognizing it is a part about trying to be prepared and ready and thinking about, is it about a different building size, a different housing footprint? How can we work with others in the community to talk about the services and that maybe smaller space or the ability to, have more one-floor living spaces and stuff. So it's awareness and it's education for a lot of that, I agree. We need to be resilient also. I mentioned that word before, and that is for us to be able to sustain how we change and be ready for the unexpected. So there's some more planning that is happening right now to talk about resiliency, but I think resiliency is from a lot of different perspectives. It's us being ready for changes in the economy and being able to sustain the ups and the downs in our community as best we can. So those are aspects that help to weigh into our policy development. And then ultimately that one key place that I mentioned at the beginning when it comes to the vision, it has to do with the community voice and collaboration. We did a lot of that when we were working on the growth policy about 3 years ago. And an aspect of this is making sure that you're reaching a lot of different demographics, different age groups in the population, different services, different needs, and try to get as much input and as rich input from those folks as you can. And we think we did that in a lot of different points along the way in that process of developing the city's growth policy. And that's not the only measure for us. It's just one of the more recent things that we did in the last 3 years that was a big project that shapes the rest of our policies. So I'm referring to it quite a bit.
Look, Al, if I could interrupt. How many people here participated in the growth policy public process? Okay. If you could do it all over, go back in time 5 years, how many more would want to do it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I was hoping for. Okay.
And you do revisit growth policies too, so I hope that the next time that we're out looking for input, you'll know what we're talking about. It won't sound foreign to you, and we would welcome you to find a way into that process. So, ultimately, the benefit for us and for everybody when we're talking about trying to get input from people into shaping our vision and talking about the policy and direction for the city is that we get educated and the community is in an education mode too. You're engaging and we're being enriched by that. And then ultimately I think that it is very empowering because you now know ways that you can act and interact in city, I think just like this leadership process is doing. There are ways that you are empowered by participating in the planning processes and know that there are other things you can do in your neighborhoods or community services to work towards these goals, common goals. So, just going to shift gears and start talking about the growth policy with a little more background for you. We called it our Missoula because it was important to know that and try to capture that this was a policy document that was really written for and by the people in the community for our Missoula the way we imagined it to be, and that was a 20-year vision. And it was people working in that process, and we had hundreds of people helping to develop the policy documents, the goals and the objectives, and craft the vision statement. So there was a lot of participation in developing and getting us there. We worked on the document, the growth policy, back in 2014 and 2015, had it adopted by the end of 2015. And it was an important point because it was the first time, I think in a very long time, that the city actually developed a policy for itself. So it's a city voice. So what is a growth policy? Well, the state actually requires us to have a growth policy. It's their term. And we have to have it if we have zoning, which we do. What it does is it provides a guide for how decision makers, how decisions are made related to especially our public facilities and our infrastructure. It is that vision for how we plan to grow and it helps all our agencies also to come in line and know what the direction is intended towards for a 20-year time frame. And it is comprehensive, so it has to cover many different things that have to do with living in a community. It's not ultimately the rules. It helps to set you up for the future of working together and developing rules and looking at ways to implement. We went through that process in several different phases, really a lot like I've just been talking about. The setup is about knowing about our community, looking at the facts, looking at the past, building on that continuum. And then having that information at hand, we are having this listening and engaging portion that we really kind of continued as we went along. And while we were listening and having these sessions talking to people about different aspects of our community, we asked if anybody wanted to participate in developing the policies, and we built this list, these groups of people that helped write it. So that's where we get to the envisioning part. They're informed, they have that information, that detail, the data with them, and then they start to scope out what kind of policies we should be developing for the city. We wrote the document and then we brought it in for adoption. Another way to look at it is in these tiers of starting with the facts, the existing conditions, working through the goals and policies for the city, and then developing our actions. And ultimately, one of the main ways that we think about how to make it happen and have action for the city is through what we call land use. Those are our general guiding descriptions of areas around the entire city. And then you have zoning that sort of sits on top of that. So the different ways that we talk about the aspects of our community really have to do with these 5 or 6 key characteristics or elements that are in the plan. It's about livability, and we combine several categories under that livability, the culture and the history of our place, and the services that we provide. The economic health, so we have to talk about jobs and how to sustain our economy. Safety and wellness, this became really important, and it has a lot of significance to it than when we talk about the health of our community, which has become a much more significant framework right now. Housing, community design is where we think about land use and transportation and the qualities and infrastructure of our place, and then environmental qualities. So those are the 6 characteristics, or elements, I should say. Then if you ever crack the growth policy open, it is online, and it's rmissoula.com, I think. Org. Oh, it's on the book, right? Yeah. It's on the, yeah. If you crack it open, the first section, the first portion is the policy pieces, and that's where you'll see descriptions about the issues we have and how we want to try to solve it. And there you find goals, objectives, and actions also. And then the back end has the data about our community, the information portion. Then finally, we have like a land use map. And I mentioned this. This is the guiding land use descriptions that kind of groups and generalizes places and ways to think about services and mixing things more, because we want to be resilient in thinking about our changing ages in our community. So that's how a land use map gets organized, and then we think about this as it relates to the more detailed lines that have to do with zoning. So making it happen for us out of the growth policy work has a lot to do with our action section in the growth policy, and it can get sorted in a lot of different ways. You know, in the growth policy we talked about it with ways that we can coordinate with other organizations, ways that we can develop more detailed plans, ways that we can look at changing some of our rules and our regulations, or that we have programs. So those are some of the key places. One of those that I just wanted to focus on right here was about plans. More detailed plans. We have more detailed plans that might have to do with parks or with transportation. It also has to do with neighborhoods. We have several different neighborhoods around the city that have more focused neighborhood plans. And I think that this is a really a good way for neighborhoods to come together and strategize about ways to improve things in their own neighborhoods and be empowered to make a difference themselves. And I was just going to use the North Side West Side plan as an example of that. There are others I think you'll hear about later tonight, but this one was adopted by the city. So it's focused on a particular neighborhood in the city that had some needs. You know, there were some changes going on, there were issues going on, so the city said, we need to come in here and look at it in a more focused way and drill down a little bit deeper to help guide it. And when it did that in 2000, there was a lot of people in that neighborhood that helped participate in developing it. So even before the plan was done, a lot of things were happening. They were done with the help of the residents being aware and coming together and being engaged in what's going on in their neighborhood. So before we even finished adopting a plan, meaning getting government to weigh in on something and bless it, and you know, all the, you got to go to planning board, you got to do this and that. Before you even did that, actions were already happening. Work was being done on the project playground on the West Side Park. They were fundraising and finding volunteers to help build that park. They were establishing their own neighborhood community development corporation. They were saying, we have a problem with getting across the railway and we need to advocate with whoever it might be to try to get a bridge over the railway tracks. And then there were, you know, numerous examples of ways to provide a voice and comment on housing projects that were happening in the area, adaptive reuse that was happening, spearheading surveys that was happening in the area. So that was before the plan was even adopted. About 5 or 6 years later, they did an update to the plan, and we were able to report a bunch more things that were happening in that neighborhood. More housing improvements, construction of trails and greenways, outdoor cinema. Again, these are things that are not about government approving somebody having an outdoor cinema, but the organization and the people in the neighborhood came together and said, that's a way to bring people together in the evenings, let's try it out. So there's such a range, and I just wanted to kind of really send the message back to you that there's so much that you can do by being just by the nature of getting together with other people and talking about it. And it doesn't have to be land use, it doesn't have to be even a neighborhood plan, but strategies together that help to shape your community is a really great way to move forward. And when there is a need that has to do with land use or projects or transportation, you know, we're here to help and to listen. Since 2006, even more, and it's just really cool to see. That's why I say cities change. I mean, it's 19 years now, and some of the things that the neighbors talked about back in the day were like focused around the old Meadow Gold distributing buildings that was warehouse, and it's mixed use, and it's local businesses now, and there's residential across the street, and it's really happening. The problems that they had with people trying to cross Toole, California, and Scott Street. There's a roundabout there now. There's a gateway at the entrance into the neighborhood now. So some of those things do take a lot of time. They do take transportation and they take money, but some of those things don't. And so you can pick. There's a variety, and I just want to really encourage you to stay involved and keep doing what you're doing here. With that, I think I was just going to hand it over to Mike, and he's going to talk a little bit more about those rules and ways to implement.
Okay, so I'm going to try and stay on track time-wise, but having a vision is all very fine, but you have to implement it at some point. And what I wanted to talk about here is a few tools that are used to grow and allow communities to expand and thrive. So annexation is one, obviously. Rezoning, we're seeing a lot of in the city right now. Subdivision is a pretty standard process that I'll just mention real quickly. And conditional use permits. So talking first about annexation, and I want to apply these to projects that we've done fairly recently, projects that have been in the news. So the city has a focus inward policy. We're really trying to encourage development to occur in the heart of the city, where the streets and those water and sewer and all of the infrastructure is already in place. But greenfield development is going to happen no matter what. And we do have to account for that. You probably recall late last year there was a pretty significant annexation of about 3,300 acres out on the west side of town. Looking at the map here, the area in grey is the area that was annexed, and that's West Broadway, the West Broadway corridor, and then the airport south of West Broadway, of course, and the Missoula Development Park and Canyon Creek Village up there in the north eastern corner. So that was an area that we annexed, and of course people are saying, well, why and why now? Which are very reasonable questions. So first of all, we had petitions to annex for almost 90% of the properties out there. That's because when someone asks for city water and sewer, we get a petition to annex, and very often we don't exercise that at the time. It goes on file, and when there is enough petitions on file and it just makes sense for the city to annex, then that's the time we take a closer look at it. It does include about 2,500 acres. That is the airport. That's the area, all of the area in green there. The airport's pretty large, and it owns a lot of property around the developed part of the airport. It allows, we do annexation because we want to accommodate urban densities and intensities of development. That's what makes sense in the city. It's fine to have larger lots and give people alternatives out on the edge of town, but in the city it should be a dense urban environment, and that's what we're working towards. And then most importantly, obviously, is providing service. And we don't annex until we know that we can provide police and fire service, that we can, that parks can do their thing and streets also. Yes?
Is there like any kind of general rule for when annexation, like does it generally at first cost the city kind of quite a bit before it then fills in and the additional tax paid base like funds things, or is it like adding additional revenue right away?
That is a great question, and Laval's group, right as we speak, is working on an annexation policy. The city hasn't had that in the past, and really it's been more, the city's been more reactive, just, you know, to applicants asking to be in the city, and we've generally annexed, you know, properties that are contiguous with the city. But we want some certainty in that process. We want to be able to tell people, you're in an area that we're likely to annex as requests come in, or you're far out of town, you don't need, the city's not coming for you, which is, we hear a lot, you know, you're going to annex us tomorrow, when there's no benefit to the city in doing that. The costs would far outweigh any revenues that we might receive. So it's not all about dollars and cents, but it is about efficient provision of services. Yeah?
Probably a silly question. So for folks that are not within the city, Canyon Creek is a pretty significant neighborhood. They're on wells and septic tanks?
No. They are, every one of the homes in there has city water and sewer. We had 100% petitions from the neighborhood. For some reason, historical, I can't tell you why, Canyon Creek Village was allowed to get those services and stay in the county. Canyon East, which is immediately to the east, and you can drive between the two and never know you're in one subdivision or another, they were annexed into the city. So it's one of those quirks of history that happened before I came into town, for sure. So rezoning is another mechanism. It's a mechanism by which, as Laval mentioned, you have land uses and then multiple zoning designations that are consistent with one land use. So there's kind of a gradation, and depending on the land use you have, you may be able to come in and ask to rezone, to sort of move up and have a higher density zoning district. And we're seeing quite a bit of that. That's what is encouraging, or what is allowing a lot of the infill development that we're seeing in Franklin to the Fort and many other areas around town. So let's talk about the public library. This is something that is a rezoning that happened fairly recently. It's not a typical, hey, I have 5 acres, I want to increase the zoning so I can build a few more residential units. But it was a pretty interesting story. Maybe it's better to go to the map. So block 5 there, you can see the existing public library. Block 6 is the block on which the new public library is getting constructed. And what happened was, it was a land swap essentially. The library board offered to acquire block 6 to build the new library, and that owner would, after construction of the new library, that family will have ownership of block 5 and will be able to develop that. There was a bunch of different zoning districts, which is, again, pretty unusual. Commercial on block 5 and residential on block 6. What happened, or what the application was to apply for CBDs for zoning, which is the zoning that much of downtown has, that accommodated the development of the new library, the way they wanted to do the development, at the intensity with the parking that they wanted to provide. And when the old public library is demolished, which I'm certain it will be, then that will accommodate some really significant development on that block. Yes, sir?
Was eminent domain used to acquire that?
No, it was a cooperative process between the two property owners. So there was no eminent domain involved. So basically, that's what allowed this to happen. Here's the site plan that shows you the new public library. You can see the building on the north side of the site, some parking, and that parking goes under the building. There was a lot of discussion about the public infrastructure, the sidewalks where the main entrances would be, the bike racks, the trees, a lot of discussion, particularly because there's residential on the south side of that block, and we wanted to make sure that there was protections for them. So this was an early rendition of what was expected at the public library. Of course, that's under construction right now. And to to talk about, to get back to long-range planning, we're looking at these projects in the context of what they're doing. And this came from the applicant in this case, but it shows the future library, the existing library, and that's going to be a future development site, the location of a future library, the fact that it's in the cultural corridor, and its proximity to other major development that we've seen, as well as proximity to Kiwanis Park. So even when there's a large project coming through the door, we're looking at that in the context of our long-range vision for the city and making sure that that works. Subdivisions, pretty basic, but that's the way up until fairly recently. If you wanted to build some single-family homes, you would take a large parcel and you would do a subdivision. It's a state process, state-enabled process. There are minor subdivisions for up to 5 lots, major subdivisions for 6 or more, and it's a pretty specific process that the state dictates. And a good example of that is the Cowboy Flats subdivision, which I'll show you. I have to mention, though, that in 2011, the state legislature allowed what's called townhome exemption development. So much of the development that we're seeing today is townhome exemption development, not traditional subdivisions. But when you have a subdivision, that's what it looks like, and that's Door Lane, just south of Brooks. You've got the Coles just to the west there, and that's a subdivision that's under development right now. This was taken last year. It's the entrance to the subdivision that was before the homes started to get built. And then last of all, because we're running out of time, conditional use. So when you look at the use table in our zoning code, depending on the zoning district you're in, there are certain uses that are permitted, certain uses that are prohibited, and then there's this sort of middle zone. So it's a use that might be appropriate with conditions that ensure that that development will not have negative impacts on the community overall. So here is Hillview Crossing. That's the example I'm showing today. For the record, it's an application that's still in process. You probably read something about it in the newspaper. This is the location just off of Hillview Way. This is the zoning, so it's residential zoning in the middle of other residential zoning, so seems like a no-brainer, but here's the challenge. It's on a pretty good steep slope. This is a photograph, or a weird combination of photographs, taken from, I sell planners for you, taken from Hillview Way, looking down the hill, looking north down towards Wapakea Park and the Wapakea neighborhood. And, so this is the site that these folks want to develop. The townhome exemption development would, if approved, would look something like this, with 68 units, 34 duplexes. This is something that the applicant provided that shows kind of what you would see from the bottom of the hill, from the neighborhood that's at the bottom of the hill. And so this is something that the City Council is grappling with right now. It's been to a number of committee meetings. And, the concern is the density of development and the potential impacts downhill because it's on relatively steep slopes. So we're concerned about soil stability, we're concerned about steep slopes, and of course the folks at the bottom of the hill are concerned about stormwater management, what's going to, how's the stormwater going to be handled, what happens in a storm event, and so forth. There's also been a lot of questions about the road standards and connectivity, because essentially you have 2 long cul-de-sacs. There's only one way in and one way out of the neighborhood. That's never an ideal situation, but it's the reality that you're in when you're building on a steep slope like that.
I had a question for you.
Yes?
So in planning, how much is protecting view sheds coming into development services, and whether or not a thing gets zoned and projects get approved?
Yeah, I mean, it's important. It's something that's addressed in the zoning code. That's why there are limitations on doing development on steep slopes, not just for stormwater, but thinking about view sheds as well. So we have a lot of hillsides, and a lot have been developed, as you know, but I think for the most part they've been done in a pretty sensitive way. Nobody's view is guaranteed forever. If you build on a hillside and you don't own all the property around you, then there's always the possibility that other development's going to occur, but we do have standards in place for that.
Super quickly, who owns that land? It's not the developer. It's the city?
No, it's in private ownership.
Okay.
And so they're coming in, they want to do a development, and again, it's a conditional use.
We're now going into our second hour at the Missoula Redevelopment Agency. Ellen Buchanan is our director. She moved here from Johnson City, Tennessee. If anybody knows that, in particular stall. That's right. And with her today is Ruth Reinke. She's one of the board members for MRA. And I asked Ellen if she would bring a board member because it adds a different dynamic to this conversation. Oftentimes when we are reading the paper and you're starting to read about MRA, all of a sudden it seems very political. The reality is that the board is the complete opposite. It's an apolitical board. There isn't a single counselor that sits on that board. Hurrah.
No, also by law.
Oh, by law. Did I say hurrah? And it's very intentional. So they're going to talk a little bit about that dynamic. They're going to talk about some projects. This is how we invest into our future. This is what's been happening in order to really build the vision that both Mike and Lavelle talked about. So without further ado, Ellen and Rick.
Hi, and thank you for coming, and please feel free to ask questions as we go through this. I'm going to go through a fair amount of material really quickly, just to give you an overview about what we do and the tools that we use. And I would say that the visions that Lavelle talked about, tax increment financing is one of the more important tools that you can use in certain parts of the city to implement those visions that we've created for Missoula. How many people here know what tax increment financing is or have even heard about it?
What?
Tax increment financing, called TIF.
Wow.
Okay.
I'm impressed. A lot of my friends don't know, and I've been doing this for 6 years.
So, briefly, the concept is that it's a state-authorized but locally controlled funding mechanism for community and economic development. A lot of emphasis is put on economic development, but from MRA's perspective, community development is equally important, if not more so. It's a method of eliminating blight and infrastructure deficiencies, and it's a way of stabilizing and diversifying and expanding the tax base in critical areas where you've got underperforming parts of town. This is a real simple illustration. I call this TIF 101, which explains how tax increment works. When you've got an area in the red that's in decline. They're not paying for this. They're not generating enough taxes to pay for the services that are being provided to that area. City makes a decision to create an urban renewal district. So when that is done, you've got what's called the base year. That's the taxable value in that area for that year. So let's say it's $1 million that area is generating in the base when the district is created. All the growth in that district, which really happens probably even more gradually than what this graph represents in reality, goes into a special fund, and that has to be reinvested back into that geographic area. Yes?
Is that the threshold for when tax or incremental financing is approved, is when the service you're providing is not meeting its property tax base or tax base?
That's one of the criteria.
Okay.
In state law, what you have to do, and we'll get into this in another slide, but you have to do findings of blight. I think there's
okay.
16 or 18 different criteria in state law as to what blight is. So it doesn't mean all the buildings are about to fall down or that, you know, rats are running around in the streets. It can be any number of things, and I'll get into that.
Infrastructure deficiency
Deficiencies.
is one of them,
Right.
Right.
connectivity and the actual
Okay,
Or
I'm just
functioning of
trying
that
to
area.
determine
Right.
or figure out what that threshold was
Yeah,
when you say we need to invest here.
that's certainly one of the criteria, but there are a
Okay.
number of them.
Can I circle back to what you just said, Ellen? In the TIF situation, the tax increment financing happens, and as the development increases, the property taxes that increase go back into that area as part of TIF, and that's how it's funded, or it's long-term reinvestment that continues to cycle itself in that area. We're not area-specific with our taxes, other than...
Well, but the urban renewal districts are geographically specific, and I'll run through the 6 that we have in a minute. But what happens is that as projects are built in an urban renewal district, that new property tax that's created when this building is built, for instance, that goes into the special fund, which is the tax increment fund, and that has to be reinvested back in that district.
In any specific period of time?
They do have a lifespan.
Okay.
Let's give Ellen just a couple of minutes. More questions.
Well, you wanted interactive, we got it.
Just give us the basics.
So what happens when a district sunsets is that all of that new value goes back to the taxing jurisdictions. And I guess the leap of faith that people who question TIF have to make is whether or not that investment would have happened without the incentive of having the tax increment to assist with, to make the project better, to put the infrastructure in, whatever it's used for. And I would argue all day long that most of those projects won't happen in those districts without the investment of the public funds. So for instance, when the downtown district, which was the first tax increment district, sunsetted in 2005, the city realized almost $500,000 in new tax revenues. The schools was over $750,000 or over $700,000. County was close to $500,000, and the other smaller jurisdictions all had a windfall. I mean, then that became the tax base rose that much as a result of the investments that were made in.
You mean
the
after
downtown.
after the period of time of the tax increment financing?
Yes.
When that went back on the tax rolls?
Well, it was always
Yeah,
on the tax rolls, but those taxes were not going into the city general fund or to the
So
county
you're
or to the
saying when they
schools.
went back in, then they got a windfall?
Yeah, the
Okay.
base amount is always there. That $1 million always has to be there.
That's not what that says.
Yes.
That's the blue section. That's what she's saying after.
Yellow is...
It's the base plus the increment, so instead of whatever this amount was, suddenly your tax, you know, what's going to the taxing jurisdictions is the larger
But the
amount.
blue says to me that the base tax also is in the tax increment financing to finance other things.
No, the base, I mean, if there's a building torn down in an urban renewal district, we have to fill up the hole before we can start gaining increment. So if a building's torn down and it takes $20,000 out of the tax base, the first $20,000 from the new development goes to fill that hole up to get that base back to $1 million, and that continues to go to all the taxing jurisdictions. We don't touch that. We never see that money. All we see is the growth.
So what you're saying is that tax increment financing used for this development and such is only the green area there?
Correct.
Okay.
So this is just kind of a different representation of how that works, using numbers and years. So the process for creating an urban renewal district is, as I said, we have to make a finding of blight, and that's defined in state statute. It can be anything from deficient infrastructure to incompatible land uses to dilapidated buildings to an area that's not producing taxes adequate to provide services for that area. I mean, I think there's 16 or 18 different definitions of blight, and you, by law, have to meet at least 3 of those in order to make a declaration of blight. I don't think we've ever created a district in Missoula that only met 3. Once the city council approves the finding of blight, they will authorize the creation of an urban renewal plan. And here we go back to the planning that Laval was talking about. We have to create a plan that defines, it guides the development in the district, and it will identify specific urban renewal projects. And I'll give you some examples of that as we go through this further on. All of the property owners in a proposed urban renewal district are notified by certified mail. The planning board has to find that the urban renewal plan is in conformance with the city's growth policy, and then the city council acts on approval of the urban renewal plan at a notice public hearing. So there's lots of opportunity for input by the people in that proposed district before it's ever approved, and then it's certified by the Department of Revenue. That basically says we followed all the rules. So the different cities across the state have chosen to administer tax increment in different ways. Missoula, when the decision was made in 1978 to create the first urban renewal district, the city council decided to create a board to oversee the use of the tax increment in the city. We're a component unit of the city. I'm on city payroll. Board's appointed by mayor and city council, but we're able to act more quickly and more efficiently because there are rules that we go by that we don't have to. The city council does not have to act on a lot of the things that come in front of the MRA board because they're either defined in statute as eligible activities, or the city council has delegated certain programs to the board to act on. And Ruth's going to talk a little bit more about that process.
Specifically about how we make decisions when projects are brought to us. So if a developer comes to the MRA for assistance on a project that's within that urban renewal district, they'll work with staff first. And staff is really good about helping the developers know what qualifies for tax increment funds and what does not. So when they bring something to the board for a decision, they're very thoughtful about it. That doesn't mean that we don't ask questions, and I've seen the board spend as much time on a $15,000 request as on a $1.5 million request. But generally, we work with a set of criteria that has been developed over the years between the board and the staff. A lot of them before my time. I've been on the MRA board for 6 years. Some of the criteria that we use to decide whether this project is worthy of the tax increment funds include an economic stimulus. We prefer to have projects that have a 1 to 10 public to private investment, meaning that if the developer is putting $100,000 into this project, that the TIP funds might be $10,000. Now, we don't always meet that criteria because there are instances where we do work in an urban renewal district that is not related to a building project that's going to generate property taxes. But tax generation is definitely one of the things that we look at. We're generally trying to promote a 10-year sort of repayment of for the private projects, but we know that things like parks, sidewalks, and trails don't necessarily generate new property taxes, but they do have an impact on the neighborhoods and attract private projects even after the fact. So an example might be some townhomes that were built on just off of the Bitterroot Branch Trail that we had already improved the sidewalks in that neighborhood because it's in an urban renewal district, and the townhomes were built there because the neighborhood was already being improved, but they didn't specifically come to the MRA for any help with that. The general appearance of a neighborhood is also important to us, and the elimination of blight. We're also aware that investments in some developments that are done by nonprofit organizations will not generate new property taxes, but they also have a great impact on the well-being of our community and the neighborhood. couple of examples of that, helping Homeward in the old Sawmill District, creating some low-income housing, and Garden City Harvest, where we helped to pay for putting a water main in on River Road that not just helped Garden City Harvest, which is a nonprofit that doesn't pay property taxes, but it also helped the neighborhood that was previously just serviced by wells. We do look at employment generation on these projects, but it's not a strict requirement for us. Residential development, for example, is not going to create new jobs like helping Onyx Maps would, but it'll just create some short-term construction jobs. But we also see that, the housing, even if it doesn't create those long-term jobs, is an important aspect of our community, and it's important for us to participate in that. Certainly the appearance and function that would help to eliminate blight, that's where a lot of those sidewalks and street improvements come in. The impact assessment is something that we consider the positive impact of redevelopment to alleviate some broader social problems, such as vandalism or drug use. An example of that was the old Man Theater out on Highway 93 that when Stockman Bank bought that property. And we helped with the deconstruction on that, partly at the request of the city, because there was a lot of vandalism and a lot of drug use going on in that building. We asked that a developer consider deconstruction instead of demolition. So reuse of some of those materials instead of all of them going to the landfill. But deconstruction or demolition is an allowed use of TIF funds allowed by state law. And we also consider the pedestrian experience in those developments, things like lighting and landscaping. We'll see in a little bit, though, that what TIF funds can be used for is only what's in the public right-of-way. So we aren't building the parking lot with more trees, but we encourage the developer to do that in exchange for getting some of those TIF funds. We also look at special and unique opportunities. Does this project help us meet the recommendations of the Urban Renewal Plan that was approved by City Council when the district was created? Does it fit the growth policy? Does it meet the design guidelines? Does it meet other criteria that are in city policies? And of course, we look at financial assistance, the project feasibility, the developer's ability to perform, and timely completion, sort of all of those reality checks. Questions about that?
Larry.
Okay.
Oh, you got one right here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
How many board members are there?
There are 5 board members,
What are the term limits?
4 years.
How do
There
you
are
get
no
on?
term limits. They're appointed for 4 years.
The term is 4 years, and you can be reappointed.
By who?
The board members are appointed by the mayor and approved by City Council.
Blaine.
I'm hoping that you can dispel a fear that I have that landowners or in Missoula can rely on the distinction as an urban renewal district as kind of like a safety net or a reason why they might not upkeep a property because they know that letting it just wither away, they can easily qualify as an urban renewal district and get some assistance for rebuilding.
I don't think we've ever seen anything like that here. I mean, the area is generally underdeveloped or in disrepair when an urban renewal district is created.
And I think for other reasons, not because a landowner is waiting for an urban renewal district to be created.
Okay. I think that was just my fear with like the mall area, and I don't know anything about it, so I was hoping that wasn't the case. Yeah.
Take a group of property owners to get together and make that decision, to make that happen, right?
Because these are not property by property, they're
Areas.
yeah, quite large. And we'll see
Large and
maps,
small.
we'll see maps of that, but still large in terms of
Yeah.
But
the development
can or
potential.
does a property qualify for this and still stay in the same ownership it was in?
Say that again?
Yeah.
Property, can it stay in the same ownership and qualify for this to reconstruct and get TIF funds?
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Peter had a question.
I was gonna ask if you would jump into the idea of low-income housing and your involvement in getting us to that idea of no homeless people in the city.
Thank you for asking that. We love to see projects come in that include, well, I think I can speak for the whole board on this and not just me personally, but that we love to see projects come in that include some housing component that will satisfy low income to moderate income. And we do have some information towards the end of this about how we work with housing department and the new housing and community development department.
I talked to somebody in your office and I was just blown away that that's a driver
for development
that you value.
Totally.
We have some examples of how we've been able to help that. And so like Ellen said from the beginning, it's not just a matter of economic development, it's community development.
Can you just very briefly speak to how you got interested in this board and how, like, what your background is to be on the board?
Okay. I actually used to work here.
You feeling at home, are you?
I worked at First Interstate Bank for about 20 years. My interest in it really was piqued because I did know some of the people on the board, and I thought it was interesting work that they were doing. And when there was an opening, and I was asked to apply for it, I could think of 5 other people that would be equally good. But I could do that, and I would love to do that.
Okay. So quickly, we have 6 urban renewal districts. This is kind of when they were established, when they will term out, and the growth in value in the districts as of 2018 numbers, or FY18 numbers. You can see some of the newer ones have had very little growth. Some of the bigger ones have seen significant growth, and we have a fair amount of resources to invest in those districts. Front Street is a little bit deceptive, and I'll go into that further on in this presentation. But the last 4 can last longer than those dates if debt is issued in those districts. So when an urban renewal district is created, it has a 15-year life. But if you issue debt within that first 15 years, it extends the life of the district until that debt's paid off. The maximum term is 25 years, so you can have a district that can last anywhere from 15 years to 40 years, depending on the issuance of debt. None of those last 4 have reached that 15-year landmark. And so there can still be additional debt issued in those districts, and in fact there will be debt issued within the next month in 2 of the districts, the Riverfront Triangle and the Front Street District.
Question?
I just want to make sure I understand those numbers correctly. The growth in value, is that that tax value?
That's the growth in the taxable value above the base.
Okay, and so is the first number, like, that's the rate of expected growth in value?
That was what was in the base. That's what's in the base, is that first number. So
Okay.
that number, it goes up from there if you're doing a good job.
So Alex, could I clarify? So let's talk about URD2. So duration started in 1991, and so basically it started at 1.85, and as of 2018, it's now worth 4.6 million. Okay. And so then the next one, URD3, started in 2000, and now 2018 we see just basically a $3 million increase.
Right.
Increment based.
But those numbers can go up in the time.
Yes.
We hope they
We
will.
hope they will, with private investment, yes.
Can you tell us where those 2 are?
You're going to see just in a minute.
Okay.
I'll go through a map of each one. Yes.
Is that the TIF period as well?
That's what that duration is. That's
through.
the length of that urban renewal district when TIF dollars will be available to expend in those districts.
I guess I'm having a hard time with the concept because the riverfront triangle, I don't think anything's happened in that area, but yet the value has gone up.
Stockton Bank is in that district.
Oh, okay.
And
Okay.
all of that land between Broadway and the river that was owned by St. Pat's was not on the tax rolls. That all has been bought by the private developers who were doing the Riverfront Triangle project, so all of that property went back on the tax rolls.
And so they then can take advantage of that money to, okay.
All right, but the big increase obviously was Stockman Bank.
Okay, and I wasn't aware that was part of it.
So Ellen, what are you seeing in your projection now that you have data to look back on? Does that help you in forecasting, or are you saying that this is, what are you saying?
I think every district is different. I don't think there's a real common denominator other than, unless you have a catalyst project on the front end of the district, and I'll talk a little bit about that with the Front Street district in a few minutes, but unless you have a catalyst project that's going to happen, it can take years before a district starts growing increment. And District 2 is a perfect example of that. We've only started to see real growth in that district since I got here in 2004, and it was created in 1991. And when I got here in 2004, District 3 had about $400,000 a year in increment coming in, and now it's considerably more than that, obviously, because you've had a lot of development happen out there, like South Crossing and the banks that have built out there, and you're seeing a pretty good migration out along the Brooks corridor now. But it took 10 or 12 years before that really started to happen. Yeah.
So that makes me, like, if I look at these numbers, I see that haven't actually run the numbers, but it looks like the rate is increasing pretty fast. Like the projects that have started, like the one that started in 2014 for Hellgate is 10%. Like
well, nothing's happened out there.
So how did that change then?
Because value of certain. Well, one of the things that changed is that the Department of Revenue increased the value of land, particularly in the urban core and all through downtown, a lot with the last appraisal.
Okay.
And so that's got to be all in land value, because nothing has happened to any of those buildings. Now, we'll see something as a result of the Albertsons remodel, but remodels don't increase your taxes much at all. It's additions and new construction, that sort of thing. But with all the money that Trippers put into that shopping center a number of years ago, we didn't even really see a blip from that. And they spent millions of dollars there.
But it didn't increase the square footage of the building, and so the Department of Revenue can't take that into consideration because there's no new square footage of commercial property.
Right. And does that? Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I know that's okay. I'll come to you afterwards.
Oh, I'm curious if you see this as an end game of making this city less affordable to inhabit.
Making it less affordable?
By raising property and tax values, does that make the city less affordable for low-income people?
I don't think so. I mean, one of the things that's been really important to the MRA board and staff is that how we make improvements in neighborhoods that don't cause them to gentrify.
Oh, okay.
So, for instance, when the recession hit, we had money in Districts 2 and 3. Projects pretty much died for a while. And we made the decision to start building sidewalks in those low-income neighborhoods in those two districts. And by using strictly TIF dollars to build those sidewalks, it did not increase somebody's property taxes. It did not increase somebody's rent because the property taxes went up. And so it's kind of a hedge against gentrification.
Effort on your part not to go there.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you.
And thus also the philosophy of any time we can, investing in affordable housing.
Yeah.
Is there any type of framework when you're looking at projects based on, like, big box businesses as compared to local, private, small businesses? Is that any part of the judging factor?
You know, it's not, and it's not because we can't discriminate.
Yeah.
I mean, that's come up multiple times. It's certainly, you know, there's a coffee place that caused that discussion to happen. And
That's exactly what I was
I knew where you were going.
Yeah.
But, I mean, we did not subsidize Starbucks. This was a developer.
Right.
They leased that building. This is a developer out of Utah that took down an old 1950s gas station and put back that building, which just happened to be leased to Starbucks. It was a huge improvement on that lot.
Yeah.
And all we paid for was demolition and new sidewalks.
But when we talk, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
But when we talk about big box versus local, is it still part of policy or the process that you have to know to go to MRA before you start your project, right? It used to be that you could not. So I think a lot of times locals and smaller businesses don't understand that if they want investment from MRA, they need to touch base with you right out of the gate, or that opportunity isn't available. Before they break ground or before, I don't know what that deciding factor is, but.
I think if you were to go back and look at where TIF dollars have been invested, you would find better than 90% in local projects.
And I think, I would add that I think that's partly because even the local projects are going to engage an architect and, you know, maybe they've had their accountant look at it and their bank look at it, and all of them will point to the MRA. If they don't know about it, their professional advisors do.
I mean, where they may be out of luck is if they go to an architect from Denver. May not know that this tool exists. But when they go to borrow money at First Security or First Interstate or Stockman, they're going to find out. Okay, so let's run through the districts for the...
Can we go back to that number slide? I guess I just wanted to emphasize that the numbers here on the left, the base value, just a reminder that that does continue to go into the general fund and the other taxing jurisdictions like the schools and the transportation district, et cetera.
Okay, this is Urban Renewal District 2, which is our oldest district. What's what I call the Broadway Russell Street corridors. It includes the old Sawmill District, and basically, you know, runs from the railroad west to beyond Catlin, and from 3rd Street, the good food stores down here in the corner, up and gets what we call the thumb. And in the early years of Urban Renewal District 2, there were an awful lot of social service-based needs in that district, and we invested TIF dollars in a whole lot of projects that did not generate any taxes whatsoever, whether it was Western Montana Mental Health, the housing, Blattner Housing, the other Eagle Watch. It's just, there's one institution or agency after another that we helped, and we removed a lot of blight in doing that. I mean, if you've ever looked at, if you remember what it was like west of California Street before Western Montana Mental Health built all their new buildings there, it was pretty grim. And so we got a lot of blight out of the neighborhoods. We got new buildings in the neighborhoods that provided great social services that the whole community needed, and there's no tax generation from that. But this isn't just about tax generation. So the debt that we have in that district is over $14 million. A lot of that was invested in building Silver Park and Wyoming Street to make that east-west connection between Orange and Russell Street. We have some invested in the new Safeway that allowed St. Pat's to get property back where the old Safeway was. And then the Corso project, which is the apartment project on Russell and Milwaukee Way. And that project and the Safeway project are both self-supporting projects. The taxes that they generate is all that's available to service that debt. So they were set up as independent projects. So this is the old Sawmill District. One of the projects I'm really proud of, and I think all of us are, is that Sweetgrass Commons, which is the affordable housing project that's on the western edge of the old Sawmill District, is permanently affordable housing. And the reason it is was because we were able to write down the cost of the land by $250,000. So, but it had to be permanently affordable. Homeward did the project. It's a great project. It's one of the best looking projects out there. And it looks just as good as the stuff that's selling for $500,000 to $700,000.
They are a little bit
condo.
small, really.
Well, some of those first ones are pretty small in Folly Square. And this is the Corso project that I talked about. Was the old Intermountain lumber site, which was just a mess when I got here in 2004. You'll see it over on the left. Is now 200 market rate rental units. And you've also got a housing authority project on the back side of that, which is 37 permanently low-income family units. This is District 3, which we call Brooks Corridor. This is the largest district that we have currently. There's about $17 million in debt in that district. That one of the kind of cornerstone projects for me in that district, and this is not a tax generator by any means, is the bicycle pedestrian bridge we built over South Reserve Street, which had no public dollars in it whatsoever other than TIF. And that makes the connection from Missoula to Hamilton. But what's more important is it connects all of those neighborhoods to the east of Reserve Street, which basically have no park facilities, to Fort Missoula Regional Park in a safe way. So your kid can ride their bike across that bridge and stay on trails all the way to Fort Missoula Regional Park.
So probably self-evident question, but does the revenue from the increment above the base go to paying down the bond?
Yes, that's what's used to service the debt.
Yeah, which I think was a misconception when the bridge was built, that the city was spending all this money to build this bridge, and that money did not come from the general fund. It's not being paid by it's not being funded by the property taxes or somebody who lives up the Rattlesnake, for example. And I can tell you that the Midtown Association, which is the equivalent of the Missoula Downtown Association, the Midtown Association loves this project. They see that as a way to enhance the business in the Brooks corridor. And they're the ones who are paying the property taxes, right?
Like to see a counter on that bridge.
Pardon?
We do have one.
Yeah?
Yeah, and I can't tell you the
Publishing?
numbers offhand. I report them to the board periodically, but it's getting more and more impressive as time goes on.
I just feel like 90% of the issues that surround redevelopment have to do with media. I just like, it makes me mad. But like, I just don't, I don't know, I find it frustrating, and I'm not you guys, so.
You think
But I feel like, that's through life, because.
It's hard, but I mean, one of the things that's really challenging here with respect to media is that we're one of those, what I call a stair-step market, particularly with television. We don't keep reporters long. They're using this as a stepping stone to get to the next bigger market. And we spend hours with reporters trying to help them understand how TIF works. They're gone. And we start all over again.
But
and it's, yeah.
even so, I think that the Missoula Current and the Missoulian send reporters to the MRA meetings, and I think they do a decent job of reporting on the meetings. Everybody knows the Missoula Current, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's an online newspaper that, and it's free for those of you who don't know about it. MissoulaCurrent.com. And it's just reports on local news, and I mean they will ask you for a donation, and I think that's appropriate. But they do good reporting on a lot of city issues, not just the MRA. Was there another question?
Yeah.
So for like if a project, the Montana Railing part is that was done with MRA funds.
Yes.
And that whole 12 acres, was that bought with MRA fund?
It was. There was some open space money in that. There was a
Okay.
little bit left from that old open space bond.
Yeah.
A few $100,000, I don't remember. And so, but it, yeah, 90% of it was TIF funding. The trail connection through there was built completely with TIF money, and the park has been built with TIF money, and we will redevelop the northern portion, hopefully as a really model housing and mixed-use project, and a demonstration of how you can mix incomes and mix housing types and mix in neighborhood commercial in a really appropriate way. Because we have this mindset that we can only build this project, this product here, and we put this product over here, and we don't commingle, and
Are you
we can
talking
do
about
better.
the MRL Park property?
Yes, on Johnson Street.
And I feel like it's appropriate to give a shout out to MRL for giving us like a screaming deal on that property. So yes, we bought it, but man, did we get a good price on it.
Yeah, it was a gift.
Sure they got a tax write-off.
I don't care. We
Okay.
got that. We bought 12 acres in the middle of Missoula for $2 million. I'm not going to ever complain about any tax write-off that they might have got. And the neighborhood got the only park that they have around there,
Yeah.
which will open this
And
spring.
now it's off the tax base, and
That's all right.
I can pay for it.
Yeah, but
Well,
the northern
the
8
north-
acres will be back on the tax base and at a much higher rate than those buildings that are there today.
So it'll go into private.
Yeah.
It'll probably be a public-private partnership. I would hope that there's affordable component to that might be off the tax rolls, but it'll be offset by private component, which is on the tax rolls, and if you have commercial there, that's on the tax rolls. So it can be a win-win all the way around. It's a pretty exciting opportunity.
Project now?
Do what?
Are you working with someone on that project now, or is it long-range, or mid-range?
We're not yet. We've got some tenants on that property that we're trying to give some time to find other accommodations. It's kind of not cool to put a church and a nonprofit that helps kids with cancer out on the sidewalk. So we thought maybe we would let that rest a while. And I think probably Camp Make a Dream will be part of the redevelopment. They've expressed a desire to do that, and it's easy enough. It's office space. But the church needs to find a new home for sure. So some of the projects that we've helped along the Brooks Corridor, Onyx Maps, which is a great employment opportunity. They're super high-paying jobs. They're growing like crazy. That part of the area didn't have adequate water for fire protection. So we extended water mains so that those multi-story buildings could be possible.
And when that happens, the water main doesn't just help Onyx Maps. It helps other properties in that neighborhood.
Probably one of the projects I'm most proud of is the South Crossing project. When we first learned about, and this is where Coles and Cabela's is, when we first learned about that project, when it came into the city, all they were going to do was tear down the Kmart and build back 2 buildings, one for Kohl's, one for Cabela's, that was a tiny bit larger than what the Kmart footprint was. Did not require that they redo the parking lot because they weren't adding enough square footage. Did not require any improvements. I mean, they could have built those buildings right where Kmart was, and end of discussion. We went to them and we said, if you're going to have some off-site requirements of your tenants, because Cabela's was insisting that there had to be a traffic signal at Door Lane in Brooks, and traffic signals are not cheap. Door Lane needed to be rebuilt because of the traffic that was going to come through there. We needed to redo sidewalks. Sidewalks on Brooks were going to have to be redone. And we said to them, if you will build in a different pattern and you will build buildings on Brooks that face Brooks and do not have parking between the street and the businesses, we'll pay for all your offsites. We'll pay for the traffic signal. We'll pay to reconstruct Door Lane. We'll pay you to demolish your buildings and your parking lot. You have to build all that stuff back. Or you can do it all out of your pocket. Your choice. Well, they chose to build the way we wanted to see development happen along the street. It was so successful that they had people lined up to lease those outbuildings, those out parcels. And so they bought the property around the corner on Reserve where the old cinema was, and we didn't even have to have the discussion about them bringing the buildings out to the street. So it gave us a model that we can use with other developers to say, if you do it this way, we'll help you. If you don't, our money is not an entitlement. So we can use that money as an enticement. It's a carrot to get better development instead of having to use a stick. And we, at that time, didn't have development standards or design standards that would have helped with any of this. And we had nothing that would have required them to build those out parcels up to the street.
Did MRA initiate that conversation, or did
absolutely.
The city, or how did that?
I was sitting in a meeting, a design review team meeting, when they brought their original proposal in, and I just got them aside and I said, "Whoa, you know, we have money. If you'll act right, you got it."
Yeah. Where is this stuff memorialized? Do you input this master plan concept that comes about into a plan, a sub-area plan, or is it just kind of, we'll do this?
There was a plan that was done in 2003, I believe, just prior to my coming here. The city, the MRA brought in the Urban Land Institute, who brought in a whole group of experts, you know, land use planners, urban designers, economists, et cetera, et cetera. And there is a master plan for Urban Renewal District 3. I mean, it was so unwieldy that nobody knew what to do with it.
Yeah.
You know,
it really
needed
could be
organization.
3 different districts almost, because they have such different characters. And each of the urban renewal districts does have a development plan, and those have been approved by the city council.
Okay.
Yeah, but the Midtown plan goes even beyond the urban renewal plan in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's actually come to fruition. You know, when I interviewed for this position, the board asked me what I thought about Urban Renewal District 3, and I just said, I don't know what in the world y'all were thinking. I spent almost a whole day over there the day before my interview, and I said the only common denominator that I could find in that district was that every street was equally bad. And so we're building sidewalks, we're building, you know,
Gwen, did you have a question earlier that we missed?
I just wanted to talk about the MRO price on the property, and you covered it. You read my mind.
Are we running?
We're not doing
We're
it.
a few minutes before 9.
Okay, so this is the bridge over South Reserve. This is the Front Street District. I'll tell you a quick story about this building and the creation of the Front Street District. This building was the catalyst for the creation of this urban renewal district. Bank was in an antiquated facility in this spot. They needed to redo HVAC system. It was going to cost them over $1 million, and the space wasn't what they needed anyway. So they came to us and they said, we would like to rebuild here. There's always been a bank in this location from the beginning of Missoula. We would like to do the right thing, and we would like to go up and build a multi-story office building, Class A office building, and they were thinking 6 or 9 stories at that point in time. But we have to have parking or we can't do it. Can you create an urban renewal district and use TIF and parking revenues and build a parking structure? That's how this district was created. So the property taxes from this building pay the debt service on Park Place, parking garage, which is what allowed this building not to be a 2-story building or kept First Interstate, which they were considering, from going out off of Reserve and building a Greenfields bank like so many other banks were doing at the time. So and now we've got new hotel opening up in a week or two. We've got, you know, new student housing just down the street that's now open and operational. We've got a new library under construction, and all of that is because of that parking structure and the creation of this urban renewal district.
Could all those projects use MRA funds?
Yes. The library's got MRA funds in it, yeah. So with the student housing, what we did was we purchased the Front Street floor of the parking structure. So that's public parking now. That gave them $3 million to, bridge that. And if their students want to lease parking in that, they can lease it just like an employee down the street can lease it. So it worked. And we were, if we had built what we needed when we built Park Place, if we'd had the money, we would have probably built between 500 and 700 parking spaces there, and we've got 320 some. So that's all the capacity we have. So Front Street bonds, you've got First Interstate Bank, you've got Rome, you've got the Merck. This is Riverfront Triangle. You've got Stockman Bank that's built there. You've got the plans for Riverfront Triangle. There hasn't been any debt issued in this, but there will be about a little over $1.5 million in debt to reimburse Stockman Bank for their deconstruction costs, the utility relocation and upgrades that had to be done, and the new sidewalks that were built. And that'll be done within the next, several weeks probably. So there's Stockman, Riverfront Triangle, Master Plan. This is the North Reserve Scott Street District. We issued debt in that district shortly after it was created for Consumer Direct to build their corporate offices in that area. That's the big blue building that's south of Brett's. And then also Scott Street Village, which is the housing project that Dave Edgell has done there, which is workforce housing, all of which was priced below the average home price in the median home price in Missoula right now. And I think it all pre-sold, probably. So there's Consumer Direct, there's what was Clausen, and then turned into what I think is a nice little residential development. We're seeing a lot of interest in affordable housing going up in that area because there's a lot of land there that can be developed. This is the Hellgate District. This is the one that really nothing has happened in. It goes from Madison down to just on the other side of Missoula College. We think that Missoula College will cause some redevelopment to happen there. Hasn't yet, but like I said, districts are slow to get going, particularly if they don't have a catalyst project like First Interstate Bank to kick them off.
I would like to emphasize before Ellen gets to talking about the downtown urban renewal district that has sunsetted by now, is that I don't know if you will get a copy of this PowerPoint presentation, but with each of those pictures, like of Stockman Bank, et cetera, at the bottom in the fine print, it shows what the TIF money was used for, and that's the public improvements, the sewer, water, sidewalks, utilities, anything in the public right-of-way. And we encourage landscaping and pedestrian scale lighting and things like that. So I just wanted to make sure that that's understood, that we're not buying those tub shower combos, right? We're building the sidewalks and the public infrastructure. Yes?
TIF fund is a general fund, isn't it, of all combined, not separate urban renewal districts?
Oh, they're all separate. You can't cross over.
Yeah, we can't
pull TIF funds from one to pay for another? Okay.
The only way you can do, and the only way that can happen is when you have a new district created, TIF funding can be used for planning for that new district, and then it gets paid back once the district has, because you got to do the planning on the front end, and so the law allows that crossover. But we can't take money from Urban Renewal 3 and pay debt service in the Front Street district.
So the pedestrian bridge over Reserve was all paid for from that district?
Yes. We issued bonds and the debt service is paid from that district.
Yeah.
Just to clarify for my own purpose on the open space bonds require voter approval because it doesn't have this guaranteed TIF fund behind it, whereas TIF funds, because they're guaranteed, are under the purview of your board and the city council.
Well, they're guaranteed, but it's a revenue bond. And you have to have a purchaser that is willing to believe that the revenue will be there to debt service that bond. The full faith and credit of the city is not behind any TIF bonds, nor is it behind parking revenue bonds. Those are strictly revenue bonds. And
but the voters have no role in that because it's basically a quasi-private bond system. Okay.
Right. So I was going to talk a bit about downtown, but we're running out of time.
Well, I think it's worthwhile
explaining that brochure that you passed out.
Do you mind? I guess we have to be somewhere at 9 o'clock.
Yeah, let's
I think somebody should be keeping track of how many times Ellen says, this is one of my favorite projects.
Well, they changed. The skate park was for a long time. So the downtown was the first urban renewal district. It was the poster child for urban redevelopment.
In the state.
Maybe in the country. I don't know. This downtown would not exist if the leadership in this city had not had the vision that they had back in 1978 to take advantage of this new tool and create the redevelopment agency and create this first urban renewal district. But just to give you some idea, in 77, the first 6 months, over 19% of all the major crimes in the city were downtown. Fire responses were higher than any other area of the city. 76% of the residential buildings were in less than good condition. Infrastructure was deficient across the board. And like most downtowns, urban or suburban sprawl had taken its toll on downtown. The mall happened, the strip malls happened, the J.C. Penney's of the world moved out, and downtown was pretty desolate. So the Urban Renewal District was created in November of '78, and it ended in July of 2005. So if you fast forward to 2005, downtown's thriving, healthy retail, entertainment, housing, a lot of pedestrian and bicycle traffic, a lot of reinvestment of private dollars. I obviously didn't follow directions well and didn't give those brochures to Jane's office so that she could put them in your notebooks, but I leave them on the table, maybe they'll get put in the notebooks. This is a kind of a recap of the first urban renewal district that our board encouraged us to put together after the district ended. And you'll see a lot of before and afters in there. The river was a mess. The riverfront was a mess when the district was created. Now you've got the river cleaned up mainly through the investment in trails and parks that were made with TIF funds. You've got buildings that are now facing the river instead of turning their back on the river. We still have work to do in parts of downtown, but by and large there's been a huge transformation, and I would argue all day long that is because of the creation of that urban renewal district and the investment of TIF dollars. When we ran the numbers, I think it surprised even our veteran employees who've been there now 30, 35 years. There'd been over $20 million of TIF money reinvested in the downtown, and it leveraged over $200 million of investment, whether it was private, state, or federal money. We provided the match for the money, the state and federal monies that built the trails, and other grants that we were able to get. It's just, the city government, the county government, and St. Pat's has remained downtown, which is a huge employment base. And there was a time when both the county and the city were talking about moving major components out of the downtown. And the other thing that was going on in 2005 is that Missoula was in the beginning of this transition from a large town to a small city, and that may not sound significant, but it's very significant. And there were growing pains. Missoula didn't really know what it wanted to be when I got here in 2004, I don't think. You started to have conflicts between new development happening down and around downtown in the historic neighborhoods. And you had some city council members who wanted to rezone downtown. Well, that was the catalyst for doing the first downtown master plan. Because while you had, as Laval pointed out, neighborhood plans all over the city, north side, west side, Franklin to Fort, Rattlesnake, they all had neighborhood. There had never been a plan for downtown. So we were instrumental along with the Downtown Association in causing that first downtown plan to happen. And now we're in the process of re-examining that plan and doing the next iteration of it. So I think, the importance of TIF funding is all around you as you walk around downtown. There isn't a renovated building that didn't have TIF money in it. There isn't a building with a sprinkler system and proper fire exits that didn't have TIF money in it. There isn't a trail or a park that didn't have TIF money in it. And it's absolutely transformative. And it continues. You know, we've come back in and we've picked the areas where we weren't so successful with the first district, and we've created Front Street District and Riverfront Triangle District, because nothing happened in Riverfront Triangle at all. There still hasn't, other than Stockman Bank across the street now. But we're hopeful that that's going to redevelop in the next year or two. So we're still doing it. We're still at it. We're still trying to make downtown better.
I'll take that one. Those improvements in downtown Missoula, I think, were instrumental in attracting events like the River City Roots Festival. I mean, she didn't want to blow her own horn. and as well as the renovation of the Top Hat and the Wilma, and making it the music center that we are today.
Yeah, I don't think you would have seen Nick Chakotay make the investments he made in downtown
if we hadn't
if
already
the investment
done the
hadn't
work
already been
downtown.
made. And you know, there are a lot of events now. Karis Park brings 1 million people a year downtown, to downtown tonight, out to lunch, kids' activities at Roots Fest. It's the living room of Missoula. And tourism is become another major economic driver in Missoula, and a lot of those tourists come downtown because we've got a very cool downtown. So,
the Oscar music when people are talking. But I know that it's been a long evening and people are getting tired. And,
okay.
I don't know if you've got a lot more that you wanted to just say super quick, or
I think
people
we've
wanted to
touched.
stay afterwards and ask questions if you have specific questions. But I wanted to thank Helen and Ruth so much for coming in, and Mike and Laval. And Laval did do the Wordles, and we're totally out of time, so I think we're going to email that out to everyone. Basically, the bigger the word, the more people said it. So it gives you just kind of this interesting graphic of a snapshot of values in terms of Missoula. Is there anything you just wanted to wrap up super quick?
No, I think we wove most of it through.
Because we have talked a little bit about housing and parks and trails. I'm sorry that we didn't get to spend more time on that, because I think that that aspect of building community is so important, and we are very happy to be part of that. The housing plans that have been brought to the city, I think making Missoula Home, for example, all of those planning documents and consultants do mention the importance of TIF as a tool to achieve our goals for housing in the community.
Great. So thank you so much.